Heard it say recording. Okay, folks, it is shortly after 5, so we'll call the meeting to order, and this is our town council committees meeting. And we're hearing tonight from the Community Development Committee, from the Comprehensive Plan Committee, and from the Finance and Operations Committee. And we are adding an item to the agenda of the Community Development Committee, which will be a discussion on HR 6707. And all council members are present except for Councilor Robertson, who is out of town today. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Community Development Chair.
All right, we have two items. First, item A is proposed amendment to town of Orono code of ordinances. Chapter 34, section 34-94 to allow for discretionary dates. The overnight parking ban begins and ends.
It is, and you might all shoot me down and tell me to move on, but most of the time when council has a discussion, and you arrive at a conclusion, I try not to bring it back. But earlier this year, we had a brief discussion. Councilor Robertson actually instituted it or initiated it about the parking ban, and we were having difficulty figuring out the date, right? So we were trying to figure out how much of our weather pattern is cyclical and how much of it is climate change. And what the council ended up coming back to was this idea that we would continue to evaluate, that Rob keeps really good data on the dates of storms, the type of storm, and that we would come back. So that was fine. Then November hit, and it's gorgeous, and it does not feel like winter at all. It feels more like not even fall at times. So it made us kind of go back to the drawing board with the idea of understanding that it would be really difficult to necessarily pick a particular day, but also for right now, as I mentioned in background, I have asked the police department to suspend ticketing because of the ban, just because it doesn't putting myself in the shoes of a resident, it doesn't feel fair. And so Rob and Dan Merrill, who is sneaking behind us today, kind of went back and forth, and what we're wondering is, would it make sense to leave the ban dates the way they are, but amend the ordinance to give the town manager, in consultation with the public works director and the chief of police, which is consistent with other types of parking enforcement, the ability to suspend enforcement of the ban due to conditions on ground. So what we're looking at is not going to a place of it's snowing, therefore we'll have a ban. That's why this ban was implemented. There are places in Orono that we can't get a plow truck down if people are parking beside the road. So our thought is we would go ahead the way we normally do in October, and we start educating the public about the parking ban. We put the lovely educational non-tickets on people's window to let them know that the ban is coming, but that we are directing them to our avenues where people can get information, like the town sign, like the website, like our Facebook page, to see when enforcement is going to begin. It wouldn't be perfect, but Rob can usually look out on a long-range forecast with a few days notice to be able to tell the public, hey, look, this is where we are. And we could make a decision at that point that we are turning seasonal. And I think that seasonal turn is kind of important. It's hard when it's 60 and 70 degrees to manage kind of the parking. The other thing I will just let people know, so we did understand that parking enforcement is really important. Winter parking ban enforcement is really important for public works operation. Dan, Chief Merrill, has worked really hard to educate his staff to enforce that. And so on one hand, on the second, we went out and we have a brand new officer that wrote a bunch of tickets for people who were violating the ordinance. We have gone back and erased those tickets. So if people try to pay them, they'll get reimbursed for them. If they call, we already took them. So that is where we are at this point. So I'm coming to you. You can say, no, Sophie, that isn't what we want to do, but it seemed like a compromise.
Sounds like a great plan. I think, I appreciate the flexibility, because that, I heard stuff too, and I was scratching my head and literally went back and watched the meetings, like, wait, how did we end on that meeting? So I think that's a great flexibility, and it sounds reasonable that you guys it can be worked out, and I think it makes sense to keep the dates where they are. That way, everyone still knows that's consistent, and then if there's no enforcement until it needs to be enforced, and then we get that word out, there's kind of no, there's no saying I didn't know, oh, I did change or any of that stuff. So you eliminate all that stuff by keeping the consistent date and reason to enforce it. I think is great. Thanks for the work.
I think, like, I like the common sense approach to it. It doesn't make sense to write tickets to people on a 70-degree evening. And, you know, despite it, I mean, I understand the law is the law, the ordinance is this, but I like to think that we're a town that's a little bit more flexible and common sense oriented than that, and not to be punitive. What I don't want as a result of this change, and I'm generally supportive of it, but what I don't want is to have you or staff get put into a position where townsfolk are bickering with you about what they think the weather is. And that's what worries me. Like, is this opening a can of worms where staff is going to experience a lot of static from residents who want to argue about the weather with you till the cows come home? So that's my only concern and hesitation about this.
Well, I mean, my thought is, once we decide to start it, it will be that it will be started for 3 days and then it's off for 3 days. So once we start it, we'll start. So it'll be kind of a cut and dry beginning and end. So hopefully that part of it, because there are times when we need access to the streets and it's not snowing, like for pushing snow back, cleaning up, falling snow, those kinds of things. So just because it's not snowing doesn't necessarily mean that we don't need to do public works activities in those areas at night. So,
And I live with an 8-year-old who's very good at negotiating.
yeah,
And so if I give an inch, she wants to negotiate the mile. And now I appreciate the hustle. However, what I'm thinking is that if we do go with this plan, we might want to expect a couple of years of education, probably with the public, where even though we'll say, hey, once it starts, you're still gonna have people, when we have like a balmy day and it hasn't snowed for 2 weeks in January, they're gonna be calling you up and arguing with you about it. I mean, we just know that it's gonna happen, so there'll be
If you
a
could
period of
Put your mind at some ease. We aren't.
Okay, great.
They already call and complain, or when there's an ice event and Rob just needs to get down the road because we need to get some sand and salt on the road. And so we send PD in to knock on doors. Yeah, well, they don't see it. And it's not nobody is being unreasonable or mean, but we do have some experience here being able to say, this is why we made the decision we made, and I'm sorry we don't agree with it. My expectation is if council decides to authorize us or grant us the discretion that you would, unless we are the town manager, even if I'm not here, is being truly way out of bounds with it, that you would be supporting that discretion. I mean, that kind of is the other side. So staff would not be in it alone.
I think it's a great plan and I fully support it. Makes sense.
I also think it's a step in the right direction, and all of this is a positive change. And this is slightly tangential to this, but I do think it's worth raising. Again and again, I've raised it a couple times. I don't know exactly what the solution is, but I do think currently having no real overnight parking available still does incentivize drunk driving. most students who might drink too much and not be able to drive their car home, but don't have any place to park, so. I don't know exactly, that is not. Something we can deal with here, but I just wanna sort of be one of those squeaky wheels like Leo was with the light on the bridge.
I have no reservations. It seems like a reasonable way forward, and I think it's nice to provide some flexibility and leniency on 70-degree days in November. Yep.
The only thing I would like to add before we close out this conversation is I was so disappointed to see the comments on the Facebook post relating to this issue. If folks are like listening out there, like it got really, people were being cruel to each other. And I thought that was very surprising to me. And I guess I would just like to say, like, folks, like we're all neighbors. There's no need, it's a parking ticket. Like, there's no need to have that kind of, I know that we're kind of in the mindset where everyone's always fighting on social media, but like, it really disappointed me to see that in the comments of that post. So I would just hope that folks could maybe think twice before they start doing that on town Facebook posts.
Was there a post on the town's Facebook post?
So we had, our officer that's doing social media, is also doing double duty, or triple duty on the road as a school resource officer and doing social media right now. And he kind of missed the initial message from the chief of we're not enforcing, and on Friday morning put out a funny "Here Comes Winter" had a post with the parking ban is in effect, and chief and I caught it and wandered over, and he put I think an equally funny "Whoa, stop, whoa, I got out, didn't get it, the message, we're not doing it right now." And I think you had a mixture of comments, some people who felt like the ban is the ban and you should just leave it be. And somebody else who got a ticket, who unfortunately, instead of coming and talking to the police, calling and talking to the police department about the ticket, expressed some real frustration about it. And then you have people who like to kind of go back and forth, and that is the risk when you have social media. The town cannot revise, can't take out unless it meets a very clear definition, unacceptable definition. I don't.
So you have direction from us?
So what I'm hearing is that we could post, so this year we're kind of out of it, because we would call a public hearing. It's too late to have a public hearing at this point for November. So we would call it in November so that the world knows, and hold a public hearing in December. It's not land use, therefore you can pass an order, which would mean that if Rob is starting to sweep or getting ready to sweep in March, we could stop enforcing the ban in March as well. So on both ends of the ban. My understanding, given the general agreement here, is that you're fine with the informal place that Chief Merrill and I are at in terms of not enforcing it moving forward. So you're not going to get me in trouble for not enforcing the ordinance.
That's fine. Agreed.
We can do that.
All right. Next item on our agenda is discussion of HR 6707. That is, I'm so here at all.
I'm gonna start. So I emailed this rather late to the rest of the council, but I did CC you all with a letter I've drafted. The issue at hand is basically that there's a bill that's been proposed federal level by Congressman Golden. HR 6707, the Advancing Equality for Wabanaki Nations Act, I think it's what's called. And it aims to correct one side of the Land Claim Settlement Act of 1980, under which our neighbors, the Penobscot, as well as the rest of the Wabanaki nations in Maine, they've been subject to what I think are very unreasonable restrictions on their abilities to access federal funding and benefit from various federal legislation. As a result, of this law that gives Maine special privileges that no other state has to restrict tribes' access to these things. I think as good neighbors to the Penobscot, as well as just, I think, people who can sort of discern something that is a just change that would be made. I think we could lend our support by putting out a letter to the full congressional delegation of Maine, just saying that we as a town that lives along the Penobscot River, who are a neighbor of the Penobscot Nation, support a change to that law. So I mean, I could go more into detail about the history of the Land Claim Settlement Act and how we've gotten to this place and sort of how Maine is able to do these things, if people are interested, but I also don't want to insult anybody's intelligence if everybody's already familiar with that.
So could you?
Yeah, so I followed up. I want to first start by saying this is a pure policy decision and it is not, I am not attempting in any way to give you guidance on how you should decide this. However, based on previous discussions council has had around lending its voice to support or oppose legislation, I wanted to share a couple of things with you. The first is I did reach out to Representative Bolden's office today to understand the timeline, because I really felt like the timeline would indicate how much time you had to make a decision and how public your conversation could be, because at this point there has been no notice, pre-notice to the public that you're going to have this consideration. They are they believe that so nothing is scheduled this week. They're not sure that anything will be scheduled the next week, and the following week is the holiday, so they would not expect to have something. So when I specifically said the 15th, would that work? So that would be the day after your next council meeting. They thought that would be fine in terms of their support. So that just means that you can do whatever you want, but you do have a little bit of time to work with here. I also, during that conversation, the representative I was talking with at Representative Bolden's office indicated that, you know, a letter to the editor would be something they would be very appreciative of, because they couldn't get Senator King on board with this legislation. So I reached out to Senator King's office because based on my history, I would not have expected him to not support this legislation. So the normal, when council has a topic like this ahead of it, whether it be fluoride or anything that's not specific to municipal government that I would just know off the top of my head, council usually asks me to look for the other side. That usually come with one side, and my job is to go out and just, what is the counter argument? So I got that from Senator King's office. I have an email from his rep that quotes part of a letter he sent to constituents about this issue, and she also sent me the a letter of opposition that he holds out as having articulating his views. So I have that for you. If this is something you want to take time with, I have a copy of the letter that Rob provided, the HR 6707. When I pulled that, there's an awful lot of, we want to revise by taking out this word and putting in this word. So you really have to go back to the Settlement Act. I have a copy of that. And I also have a copy of the legislation of the correspondence from Senator King's office. So my assumption was that we would have, through Rob, a really good understanding of why we should vote for it. So I'm not trying to weigh it one way or the other. I just didn't want to duplicate, but I want to make sure you have both sides if you want it. So I've got these here if you want them.
So yeah, first, I really appreciate the letter Rob wrote. It is in keeping with my understanding of some of the not great things that happen with those. I'd love to see Sophie's material, but I'd also like to know how the Penobscot Nation feels about this issue.
So I was reached out to by Ambassador Molly and Dana, as well as John Diefenbacher, the executive director of the Wabanaki Alliance, asking if Orono was willing to take something like this up. Which is what motivated me to draft the letter in the first place. I think Alaska Nation, as well as the rest of the Wabanaki nations who are working on policy through the Wabanaki Alliance, are very interested in seeing this pass. Yeah. So it's
great.
my understanding, and I think I can be fairly confident in saying that the Alaska Nation is interested in seeing this pass.
I appreciate it. That's exactly what I would be looking for. I did call Rob to get some background today, and I did look up the law or whatever, the law, bill. And like you said, it just points to change this and that, and I didn't have time to go back to the document. So that's the stuff that I would want to sit through and understand before I would want to vote on it. No,
It's my understanding, I haven't seen the material that Sophie's prepared for us yet from King's office. My understanding that the primary oppositions to this are worries that it is in some way retroactive. Applying to the over 150 laws that have been that have, as a result of the Settlement Act, excluded the Wabanaki nations, despite them applying to every other tribe in the country. I think it's Golden has been very clear at every step here, and the bill itself, I think, is fairly clear as a bill like this can be constantly referring and changing sentences in a lot from 40 years ago. That this is merely prospective. It's meant to just change the law going forward so that tribes in Maine no longer have to lobby King and Collins and Golden and Pingree every time they want to be included in any federal funding or any other federal activity meant to benefit all tribes. I think that's my understanding of their argument, and that's also my counter to it. And I think it's fairly robust, but I haven't read what Sophie's got for us yet, so.
Well, I had an inkling of what some of the other criticisms were, and I scanned this email from the representative at Angus King's office to confirm this, but there's also this argument about thinking it should be something that's negotiated that the state can be involved in. Which, I mean, personally, I don't agree with that, but I think that that's one of those objections that the state doesn't want this to just transpire at the congressional level.
In the Settlement Act, the issues with it have to be dealt with at the federal level and the state level. And there's already efforts to work at the state's own relationship with the tribes through it. But that there was a land claim settlement act at the state level that needs revision if you, have those values. And the federal level is the other half, the other portion of this that the state really can't change.
And I think that the argument against King's argument has also been that, okay, yes, the treaty was negotiated between the tribes and the state. And then the tribes disagreed with how the state chose to interpret that negotiation. So it's a tangled web.
Yeah.
But I would say that, yes, we should spend some time digging through all of the material. I'm generally supportive of, I'm supportive of this bill personally. As far as council's involvement, I think we should dig into all the material and have a substantive conversation about it.
And I'm strongly in favor of this. This is an issue that I've spent considerable time learning about and working on. So I'm grateful to you, Rob, for bringing this to our consideration, and would look forward to discussing it next week. Hopefully, it sounds like would be the timeline to be able to have this be helpful and supportive to our Wabanaki neighbors in this next legislative push.
So then I'm really interested in talking about it. But I personally would need some background on how Orono Town Council has functioned regarding issues that are not explicitly municipal in the past.
So, I think, Orono Town Council for a very long time tried to. We had a couple of very active residents who would bring something to us every once in a while. We kind of try to work our way through it from divesting in fossil fuel instruments, investment instruments, to climate adaptation stuff. I think we could make the argument Maine PERS is local, which was what that was at, and climate is most definitely has a municipal focus. We were kind of getting pulled in many directions up until just recently, which is where the town council's policy or guidelines around proclamations and resolutions, which is normally, if you look at the ordinance, chapter 2, it says that all council action will come through ordinance, order, resolution, or proclamation. So those are kind of the ways that council speaks. In the proclamation and resolution, it talks about number one, if council's going to use its voice, you have to. The desire was that it would give the community notice, because one of the things we were noticing is that there are very strongly held opposing views in the community, and we wanted to make sure everybody could do that, and that there should be a tie directly to the town of Orono in some form or fashion, which is why when we do the Pride Month proclamation, or even Tree City USA or Constitution Week, we try very hard to add something in there that talks about the town of Orono. The town council has the right to use its voice in just about any way it wants to. You've got pretty broad parameters with that. I think during all of the conversations, what we kind of came down to is the idea that the Orono Town Council wanted at that time to be very to refocus to municipal operations and what was it directly impacting our community. That can, I'm not making I'm not saying this does or doesn't, just, and that the voice should be used not sparingly, but with due consideration for how it impacts everybody in our community. So if you ask, should you or shouldn't you, the only thing I would give you pause with would have been the idea of coming up with a decision to have council speak at a committee meeting, which is normally not done. To make sure that you understand, even if you don't agree with both sides of the circumstance, so you could understand how people in the community, what the feelings or beliefs of people in the community.
I mean, I'm assuming we're not gonna get into the content of the letter itself in this conversation tonight. That's not the purpose of this meeting, but one of the things that struck me when I was reading it is I was remembering when we went through with the carbon emissions one and or carbon footprint one, and there needs, for me, there really needs to be a stronger tie to how this impacts our community. It takes me 10 seconds to come up with that personally, how this very strongly ties to our residents and our community. But I think that, you know, if we do choose to go down that road, it is very important that whatever final draft would come out of this process has to very deeply tie and connect to our community. Perhaps not quite as much focusing on the wrongdoing of the state, but why this would be the right thing for our residents and our neighbors.
So I think you've got a lot of that work somewhat done already, and I tried to kind of lay that out in my response to, I think I responded to everybody when I said, got it, Rob, I'll make sure everybody has a copy. And the tie here is when we did, instead of doing a land acknowledgement, we did a resolution recognizing the historic and contemporary presence of Indigenous people in Orono. And that's a long title, but one of the things that you did in that is you made it very clear that one of your goals was to support the sovereignty of the Penobscot Nation and the Wabanaki people. So in that, I think you've kind of gotten over some of that hump. I would say that, this, Rob, I had not experienced a lot of Rob's writing in the past. He's definitely, I can see why he was a good advocate. It was a fiery, really well done letter. Most of the time, council would pull back just a little bit, in that. And I also think just so I think if you kind of pulled back just a little bit and tied it to that longer standing resolution, you would probably hit the mark that you're looking for.
I'd be happy to work with you on revisions this week, Rob, if you wanted a buddy.
Sure.
In wordsmithing, this is something that I'd be excited to work on.
I can give you, if you give me the language, I can put it into our normal format, which would work. Wonderful.
Government talk.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, semicolon.
I wasn't even gonna do whereases.
Whereas.
We just
Yeah.
got formatted.
And Sophie, thanks for doing this background reading and also pointing us to the resolution regarding Indigenous people that happened before I was on council. That
That
was
is helpful.
really good thing to follow up on.
But, and again, I just want to make sure people are not hearing the fact that the only thing in the packet is against this office, is in opposition to this piece of legislation. That's simply because I thought we had the rest of it covered.
Thank you so much.
We're ready to move on to comprehensive plan committee.
Okay, that's me. We have one item, and it is to review the planning board's report of contract zone request for 74 Mill Street. Are we being joined live by a satellite by our town planner?
Should have a town planner.
Well, I see him.
Hello, Kyle.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, the audio cut out as I was joining as a panelist. Were you ready for me to go over what I had? Okay. So yeah, at the October planning board meeting, the planning board held its public hearing for the 74 Mill Street contract zone agreement. We had talked about that at council committee a couple of times, which the idea, again, was repurposing the right now buyer building into this mixed use structure with some amount of commercial storefront space on sort of the Mill Street side and multifamily apartment style in the rest of the building. So the planning board was just looking at the contract zone, which is similar to how they view ordinance amendments, where they're making a recommendation back to the town council on specifically whether or not the zone change is aligns with the goals of the comp plan. So in this case, the planning board was very supportive of this contract zone agreement, seeing as this is one of those properties identified in the comp plan as being ripe for one of these zone changes. The planning board agreed with some of the things we went over, the recommendations and goals in the comp plan, talking about increasing housing opportunities, a diverse kind of mixture of housing opportunities, mixed use, creating a better walkable feel in and around downtown. All those sorts of things that we've talked about before were there and discussed. So the planning board did not have any recommended changes to the document. They recommended it back to council to sort of move on with the adoption process, knowing that aside from the zone change, the applicant would at some point before anything actually happens, have to come back with a full site plan, subdivision plan application to go over a number of things in much greater detail. So that sort of transitions us into the public hearing part of the meeting. I think we probably had maybe 7 members of the public speak at the meeting. In general, I think most of the concerns related to the scale of the development. I think most of it stemmed from the idea that people thought the potential of 30 units in the building sounded like a lot of units to them. And the concerns were the impacts that this number of units would have on different things, whether it's noise or traffic, which it's, traffic on the, nearby streets, as well as traffic coming in and out of the access to the parking area, specifically, in the back portion of the lot on a smaller street. There were concerns brought up about infrastructure capacity, like water and sewer and things like that. And really, I mean, the consistent theme there with all of that is those are all specific review criteria in the site plan process. So traffic analysis, letters stating capacity, and looking at noise, looking at lighting plans, all of that is reviewed by the planning board in any site plan application. So it was sort of a conversation there between the planning board and some of the residents to let them know that there would be another public hearing when that application came forward, where we could probably dive into a lot greater detail into some of those things, and that they would have to pass a certain level of acceptance, before a project like that was ever actually approved. If it came back that there was some, incredible issue or impact on that area due to one of those things, it would either have to be revised in some way or, handled in some capacity before a project actually moved on. I think outside of that, one of the bigger concerns that was brought up was the idea that the units would or could be used for student housing, which is sort of as we've talked about in the past, and we've talked about with the applicant at the committee meeting before, it doesn't seem like this project is, specifically designed to attract students, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that there's any guarantee that a student, couldn't rent an apartment in the space. And I think, the comment at the meeting was hoping for something more substantial, that it wouldn't be turned into a student rental property, which could potentially enhance some of these concerns that people had. We talked about some of the things that council has talked about in the past recently about that issue, how, we're trying to provide an opportunity where everyone can have access to different types of housing. We did have one comment at the public hearing that was actually in support of the project, and they pretty much provided the counter to the concern, which is a lot of young people, if they are interested, we're talking younger professionals, families, they are interested in moving to the community. There isn't really that interim housing, rental housing that they can really find, while they're looking for, maybe something to buy or something like that. So we sort of heard both sides of that argument. Outside of that, I don't think there was really too much else. I think it was mainly the scale of it concerned people, general concern over what a potential zone change could lead to in the future, which is something we hear with most contract zone changes. People interested in knowing, what could be done on the lot if there wasn't a zone change there, preference over some sort of townhome style housing on the lot, which would involve knocking down the building and building something else. So we talked a little bit about the potential impacts there and the likelihood that something like that would even happen. But yeah, so I think that pretty much sums it up. But the next steps for this would, with the planning board recommending that it move forward, would be we could set the public hearing for the council public hearing at the upcoming council meeting, if council was okay with that, which would potentially put the council public hearing for the contract zone in December.
Thank you, Kyle. So just correct me if I'm wrong, but this is reminding me a lot of the Tyler Tech building. We're not to wade into the particulars of things that could be part of the site plan review. We're only to think about the contract zone and putting it forward for a public hearing at this point in time.
Right, and the real difference here is that, I mean, with the Tyler project, they both went to the planning board simultaneously. So with this one, that, you know, site plan subdivision application process hasn't even started yet. So there is really only the contract zone to look at, and, you know, that's sort of council's priority there. But knowing full well that that process 100% still has to happen, even if a contract zone is adopted and passed, no redevelopment, no project can take place there until that other process is also completed at the planning board level, which involves a public hearing specifically for the development side of it.
Great, thanks. Folks, what do we think?
Can Kyle just answer for me real quick? If a contract zone is approved and a particular developer doesn't take advantage of it, but ends up selling the lot, is that contract transferred to the new owner?
Yeah, so if it's approved and it's fully signed and it's recorded at the registry of deeds, then yeah, it would go with the property. So someone else could potentially come in and take advantage of that. I'm not sure we've had that situation come up before. If, you know, it was simply, I think it was approved, but never actually, you know, at some point something came up after approval and it wasn't signed and not recorded, then the contract wouldn't actually go into effect. And I think just the existing condition of what is the zoning is now would remain in place.
At what point do the details of the contract zone, the site plan, when does that happen? How does it happen? Who is involved?
So the contract zone is council. And you guys have seen a draft of that agreement. That got referred to the planning board because a contract zone is still considered land use. And under state law, anything that is modifying or enacting a land use ordinance must go to the planning board for consideration of whether or not it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. So it goes to the planning board. The planning board is required to hold a public hearing, which it did at its last meeting. For that public hearing, state law requires a certain distance of abutters be notified. We actually notify more. And we also, it's a public hearing, so it gets posted and notified as in the newspaper as required. That then, this is a report from that meeting. You then would call a public hearing for the contract zone next week at our council meeting. So it would get published in the newspaper twice. And the world is given notice of it, so all the ways we normally would. Plus, abutters get noticed again that it's coming for the town council. You would take all that information. You have to wait 1 month, or no, you don't have to wait a month. You have to wait till another meeting to make your decision on the contract zone.
So,
So the contract zone is simply the underlying zone change, which would then allow the applicant to submit the project application to the planning board. So council always makes the decisions on what the zone is and what's allowed in that zone. So that's what you're doing here. You don't ever make decisions about whether or not a project meets performance standards. That is the planning board's job to do.
so my impression of contract zone, I remember hearing about it, the other one down on Mill Street. Is that the contract zone changes, okay, we've agreed, let's put this in village commercial. That's the starting point.
And then as part of the contract, you're saying, let's put it in village commercial, but here are the pieces of village commercial that we don't agree with, that we don't want for the
Who's saying that?
council.
Right,
At
so
what
we,
stage?
It's already. in
we've
the
already
contract.
talked about that. So specifically in this one, you know, like the zone change would go from MDR to village commercial. But there were things like, you know, village commercial allows a whole host of land uses. In this contract zone agreement, the way it's written now, it would only allow multifamily housing, a select few commercial uses like retail, office space, service businesses, and restaurants, I believe, are the ones that it would allow. So that leaves out a number of commercial uses that wouldn't normally be allowed in the village commercial district. And then there's other limitations as well that were put in there, like the existing structure, the main, you know, building used on the lot is what would be used for this new use, and it wouldn't be able to be expanded. So, you know, we're not talking about, you know, a project where, you know, the applicant's adding on, going all the way down to the river and covering, you know, like our regular village commercial ordinance standard is that there is no building lot coverage maximum. So normally in the village commercial on a lot, someone could develop really the entire lot. So the contract zone here, one of the limiting factors is that you're using the existing building on the property, and that the only additions to it would be for ingress or egress, or and potentially a deck to be used by the residents, which was something the applicant had brought up. So there were a number of things that we included in there. You know, a maximum on the amount of parking that could go in, so that, you know, we're not running into sort of filling in that entire vegetated area down by the river to create runoff problems into the river and things like that. So those were in the draft document.
So I didn't realize, because I remember he showed us a parking lot and said, this is just kind of theoretical. I didn't know that we put any of that.
No, so on September 19th, at that council committee's meeting, the comp plan committee's item, one of the items to discuss was to review the contract zone for this project. So we reviewed the entire contract zone, all of the language of it, and then we referred it on to the planning board for them to review it, make their recommendation, have their public hearing. So now it's coming back to us.
But he just said that there was something in there about a maximum amount of parking spaces. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is all in the contract that we reviewed on the 19th of September and referred on to the planning board.
Okay. And so we've had public hearing. You mentioned the scale piece, and I know it's up right now, it's up to 32. And I think the developer is saying we're thinking probably more 24. Does that ever become part of the contract zone? Like a
So-
number there?
So the
So-
contract, oh, go ahead, Kyle.
Oh, I was just gonna say, the contract, the way it's written now, says you can have up to 30 dwelling units in that principal structure. That 30 units, the reason we wrote that in there was because that's what, you know, if you look at the village commercial, the amount of land you need per dwelling unit, and you look at the lot size of that lot, you come out to 30 or 31 potential dwelling units. So that was sort of the basis for that number. That was also discussed at a time when we were looking at potentially the whole building being used as residential. The applicant has suggested some interest in, some smaller commercial spaces in the building, which would potentially take away square footage from the, maximum dwelling units that could fit in that building. So I think that's why, the applicant at the planning board meeting and in other conversations, I think has expressed some, some talk about, yeah, it could be more 20 to 24 units, or I don't know what that number is exactly. I think that's, when you're getting more into the actual coming up with building plans and square footage of the units and things like that, something like that would be more fleshed out. But the contract would specifically set, the way it's written, a maximum based roughly on the normal density allowed in the village commercial.
Thanks.
So I understand the concerns that were raised by community members. I mean, I think there were reasonable concerns raised. But I have confidence in the planning board process to deal with those concerns when they actually have a plan in front of them. So at this point, again, we're just talking about the contract zone. I'm prepared to recommend that we move it forward to a public hearing.
I'm interested to hear more from the public
Yep.
about it too.
And I think for committee meetings, we decided at the start and at the end of meetings was time for.
Yeah, I'm having council speak first.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear from members of the public on this issue, but I don't have any reservations about moving it forward to the next meeting at this point.
I also would like to move it forward to public hearing. Anything else to add from council? Is there any members of the public who wanted to talk? If you want to come take a seat and speak on the issue, I don't know if folks just came to listen or to talk. Sure, have a seat. Yeah, if you could just make sure that you speak into the owl so that the folks at home can hear, and if you would not mind introducing yourself for the record.
Which owl?
That owl.
I'm Chris Bates. I live at 94 Mill Street. I've seen one or two before, so I had bought that property when I was at the last at the planning board meeting. And I too was bewildered by contract zone and the fear that something that without parameters could potentially lead to. But I thank Kyle for his overview. But I will mention that I took a look at a memorandum that came along with the materials today, and a lot of things were left out. Kyle, you can probably corroborate those or refute them. At that meeting a couple of weeks ago, all but one person talked about concerns. And perhaps the biggest concern was public safety and neighborhood safety. It doesn't show up in that memorandum for whatever reasons, and people implored that we be mindful of that. So that I would just say is the first thing. The other thing is that the planning board was asked to table the motion by the people that were assembled. And that didn't happen. Kyle, you did mention that the zoning change was opposed, but it didn't show up in your report or your letter to the town manager. And I imagine different audiences, different terminologies. And also, the people, the citizens asked about taxes and the tax implications, if there would be incentives for the contractor or the owner, or would there be any benefit to the people in the community, the homeowners in the community as well. So there were other things like that, as well as talking about shoreland rules and items of that nature, and certainly a 52 to 60 car parking lot, if paved, is going to go runoff all over the place. And even the still water, as still as it is, swells in the spring quite a bit. So there were other concerns that weren't mentioned in the overview, and I just wanted to add to those. And one of the specifics is that where the parking lot is going to be on off of Spring Street. That's a fairly narrow street,
Sorry,
Sorry, can you, I'm
you
sorry.
really need to focus on speaking to the owl, or nobody will hear you.
Yeah.
They,
Well,
they can hear you.
okay,
You don't have,
all right,
you don't have to look at them, they'll hear you.
I won't say anything. Okay, so 50 vehicles, but when it comes to Spring Street, that's more narrow than Mill Street. And the two-way traffic Mill Street as well. So with 15 to 16 vehicles, is the only ingress and egress, the only in and out there. I think for safety matters, for public safety, to get in there with a fire truck or some of the things they may need to, it would benefit us if we could think of another way to do that. And I think that that would up the cost, but I don't know if those costs are then borne by the town as opposed to the contractor, which, you know, I think the contractor would probably pay for that. So I just wanted you to imagine what might happen to my neighbors' yards who live on Spring Street. What is gonna happen there? You know, so I think that the overview was general, but there were other concerns, and to me, it seemed like there were a lot of people there, but you're thinking only 6 people or 7 people got up to speak. And I think the concern with that
I
is
think
when you're
roughly,
told-
yeah.
when you're told, if somebody asks your question, don't ask it again. That has not a chilling effect, but it could stop someone else from popping up and asking. I'm sorry about
Nope, I didn't have anything.
So if I could just clarify, so I watched the planning board. I love Zoom because I can sit at home and enjoy the evening at home and still be able to watch the evening. When Kyle made the memo back to the town council, he was focused on the contract zone comments. When I watched the planning board, I think people had lots of very good feedback and concerns raised. Most of them had to do with performance standards. So for example, the amount of coverage on a lot is a performance standard. The distance from the shoreline is a performance standard. The runoff, very significant performance standard. Impact in terms of public safety capacity, sewer capacity, all of that are performance standards. So it's not that they aren't important, they're very important. It's simply separating what town council's role is and what the planning board's role is. And the planning board, while they weren't engaging a lot of that at that public hearing, would be very open to that when a plan comes back. And quite honestly, the community members that came to the planning board really did the contractor a really good service in that you gave them a heads up as to what the issues were going to be, so that as they work with Kyle, they'll be working at trying to solve and resolve some of those issues or concerns. So definitely not an issue of we don't care. I think the town cares very deeply. I think it's more an issue of what the question is ahead of people.
I know it's a lot of inside baseball and like, what is a contract zone versus the site plan and how does all of this work? And, you know, it can be a lot. I think the important thing to remember or take away about council's role in this is we're really looking at would we be in favor of this type of a property being redeveloped in such a way or to fit into this particular zoning standard? And it's not our place to get into the performance standards and the site plan, but in general, creating the conditions where redevelopment could potentially happen there and letting the planning board do its job with input from the residents about how it would impact the neighborhood, if that makes more sense.
You know, it gives me a sense of all the different shops that are working together, but in terms of the zoning, as you mentioned, the zoning change is really not necessary. Everything, there have been businesses there for a long time. They're changing the density of that town, you know, that part of the town. And my best guess from looking at the rough plans was that families aren't going to move in here. Unless it's me and my two cats, maybe that, but because some of these were pretty small footprints for apartments, and we know they're of that, so. The upwardly mobile families that are hoped for hopefully will come, but you're not inspired by looking at the in-process items, so as it pertains to the zoning could stay the same and still have apartments right there. I don't know what you're gonna do with the parking up on the street.
So an interesting thing too is like part of this process also is, and what the planning board is trying to do is this consistent with our current comprehensive plan, the goals of our current comprehensive plan, which it very much seems to be in alignment with that. However, we are about to redo our comprehensive plan. So not to ensnare you into a volunteer position, but you might consider, giving Sophie your information and participating in that next comprehensive plan process, because that's the kind of a place where the community makes decisions about these really future events, you know, so a previous group of people kind of set this in motion today where we're considering, does this meet the goals of the comprehensive plan that we currently have? So I would love to dragoon anyone into service who walks in the door here. So Sophie will be happy to take your information.
I would like to read that comprehensive plan unless it's really dry.
It's right under. The other thing I would just clarify for folks, because we hear it a lot when we think about contract zones. Most contract zones are for properties that were grandfathered for a use that's no longer allowed in that place. So that when it's time to redevelop them, what makes sense for the building or the space doesn't match the existing zoning. And that's definitely the situation here, that buyer existed before that became medium density residential. So in order for it to continue as anything other than buyer, it would either need to move to medium density residential, which would be a 1 or 2 family dwelling, or have some change to the underlying.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Did anybody else want to speak?
What is it now?
This is the owl, if you could shout at it, please.
Well,
Could you
I'm
identify
sorry.
yourself? for the
oh
record,
yes,
please?
I'm Lisa Feldman and I live at 33 Mill Street, apartment 6. The old Parks Hardware Towers. I have the penthouse suite. When I was studying planning and zoning, which was way back in the 90s when Kyle was learning how to read, one of the things that we learned was that first is that site plan review is a very weak weapon. It's kind of like trying to hang on to the caboose to stop the train from leaving the station. So, you know, limited faith in the powers of site plan review. Also, Sophie has explained very well why in an old town like Orono, where zoning came to us late, why contract zoning is something that you have to do. But one of the things I learned was that when you're doing a lot of contract zoning, you have a poor planning process. And so I'd like to talk, rather than about specific concerns here, just talk about planning as a town and what the role of council is in a broader way, rather than these specific legal things that we've been discussing, which has been perfect. And I'd like to say, you know, the Byers building is an eyesore. I'd love to see that property redeveloped in a responsible way, some kind of mixed use development makes sense, but that covers a whole range from like living workspaces for artists with some gallery space below to, student suites with 4 bedrooms where you got 4 people and all their boyfriends and girlfriends and, so it covers a lot of ground, and 30 units tells us nothing. So I want to contextualize things by asking some questions. And I'll start with something that's very, very basic. Now, the flow of our beloved Penobscot River has changed because we took out all the dams. So we have a different river now than we had, 15 years ago. We know that climate change is going to affect flooding events. And so my question is, have we studied, have we taken advantage of the resources at our disposal in the shape of the Climate Change Institute at UMaine? Have we studied these effects and updated planning requirements for riverbank sites like this one? Because you go down there and the river is flowing about that far below the bank where they want to put the parking lot. Just saying, because the building site is up on a pile of dirt. Now, in various ways, we've done planning or problem-solving exercises in lots of other neighborhoods in Orono. About 20 years ago, we had some major problems on Webster side, and we had about a year-long town-gown problem-solving exercise that resulted in several important changes to our municipal ordinance, like the disorderly house and provisions for rental registration. You go down there now and you see stop signs on the corners. And that all came out of that work. When we redid our comprehensive plan, we had a lot of discussion about the kind of development we'd like to see way out in West Orono, where there isn't a lot right now. We had some discussions about changing the density of certain neighborhoods, which we did. Kyle led an excellent planning process for commercial development on Park Street to inhibit the kind of commercial sprawl we see on Stillwater Avenue in Old Town. That was very, very helpful. Under the leadership of Rob, we came up with a very careful plan to reconstruct and reconfigure a stretch of Main Street from Kelly Road to the bridge in ways that will improve both traffic flow and traffic safety. Sadly, we haven't been able to implement it. So we've done a lot of work, but in all the years I've lived here, I don't remember us ever having a big public process, civically engaged, broad-based discussion of how to retain a strong neighborhood, strong and resilient neighborhood in our Overtown and tough end neighborhoods. And that is the heart of our community, which just seems crazy to me. So without that, we're sort of left to a developer comes along and says, and you can say, well, what does zoning say about it? Not a heck of a lot. Okay, so I'm just saying that's the limitation of the kind of planning process we have in place now, and it has its limits. Another thing we need to think about is the kind of institutional changes in town that supplement and support good zoning. And we haven't really taken into account the changes at the University of Maine. When I came here to work at the University of Maine 50 years ago, 99.99999% of the students were Maine kids. They grew up here. Their moms and dads were here. Most of them plan to stay here, start careers, start families. Not here in Orono, but here in Maine, they were like, it was like a Maine place. And you had a lot more buy-in from the students who lived off campus. Because they kind of got it. Now, about a third of university students are, as we say, from away. I noticed this when I worked as an assistant registrar of voters. You can't ask a student living off campus to bring their electric bill as proof of residence because all their bills go straight to mom, and mom is in New Jersey. And most of these young people do not plan to stay here. They're not from here. They don't plan to stay. This is kind of like the temporary parking lot for 4 years. Their whole frame of reference is somewhere else. And we haven't done a lot to integrate these students into the community. And you know, I always go to candidates nights faithfully, and people run for council and they say, yes, we are going to get students really involved in the community. And like, you know, I don't watch every meeting. I don't watch every meeting, but I'm going to ask you, what are our programs for giving students internships in government, getting them
Lisa.
Involved in Parks and Rec, all that stuff. Okay, my last point.
We need to just bring it to the meeting.
But the reason people are so freaked out at the thought of students taking over this building, and you need to understand this, is because we have a whole population of students who are disconnected from the community, and we have done a very poor job as a community to address that. We could help these kids learn an important lesson. And we have a great program of rental registration, which is a big first step. But I'm wondering how we've developed that. So for example,
Lisa, I'm sorry, but if you could.
I have two questions, two sentences. The first one is, have we used that to start a landlord group so that they could discuss common concerns and do some problem solving? Second, how do we mine that application process for statistics? So for example, do we keep statistics on how many police calls there are to properties of specific landlords? So that is all I have to say. And I'm sorry if I took up too much of your time. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you for your comments. I just wanted to make sure we could stay respectful of everyone's time and on track, but we do really appreciate them. And to answer those, I don't know if Sophie would rather answer them, but generally, yes.
So the only one that I really want to unpack right now has to do with what we're talking about is the kind of the concern that the town hasn't taken time to really think about where contract zones are used and they just pop up all over the place. Number one, the comprehensive plan specifically calls out certain parcels that were ripe for contract zoning. This happens to be one of those parcels. Every once in a while, somebody comes along, Tyler Technology, which is the one you just dealt with, was ripe for contract zoning. Ayers Island, ripe for contract zoning. So the comp plan does speak to some of that, so you could go there. The other thing I would say is that the town council has a guiding document when dealing with contract zones that Kyle worked with in public. So I understand a real a feeling kind of like the world is happening to Lisa and not that the council is kind of walking through this process. I think there's a lot of thought that has gone into a lot of this, and perhaps the place to come, Lisa, would be to come talk to Kyle, and sure, happy to talk you through your other questions in a different format.
Kyle is awesome. I am on record as saying that, and I have enjoyed working with him on several times.
We agree.
So unless I'm hearing anything different, we are comfortable moving this to public hearing. Okay.
Just to clarify, we'll call a public hearing next month, next week. Will happen the week of the 14th. We would, depending on what we hear at that meeting, in order to help facilitate the development, if council's in favor of moving it forward, we would hold a special council meeting in December because we slated to close on the property. If council needs more time, then Mitch will let the developer know that, and we would advocate, we would push forward, but not to push council into a corner, but rather if everything is moving ahead, we would want to try to meet the developer's timeline if possible.
All right, well, I'm gonna,
I do hope folks with further comments and questions will come to the public hearing, because I think I certainly benefit greatly from learning from you folks and hearing your perspectives. So I really appreciate it.
I will hand the reins back over to you, Tom.
So back to finance and operations. And the first item under this topic is recommendation to consider changing the service delivery method for an upcoming request for proposals for curbside municipal solid waste and recycling collection contract.
So I'm gonna jump in just real quick first. To
Nothing
make
gets
sure.
Sophie more excited than talking about trash.
So I want to be clear just about a couple of things that we have been working with an outdated ordinance. Rob and I are well aware of that around solid waste management. That's not what this discussion is about. We are here because our curbside collection contract for both municipal solid waste and for recycling is scheduled to expire on June 30, 2022. And we normally, Rob would normally put that out to bid in April-ish, May-ish to have a contract ready for you to adopt. We had some inkling that the methods that were going to be available to us are going to shift. And so we wanted Rod to come in and talk to you a little bit about what's out there right now. When I wrote this, I thought we were going to have more flexibility than we do. I'll let Rob kind of talk about that. The reason we're here so early is if we change method, it would require some significant education for the community in order for folks to kind of understand how solid waste collection was going to happen. So I'm gonna turn it over to Rob and let Rob know that Belle has pictures of trucks and a video.
Okay. So, yeah, as Sophie said, the impetus for this conversation is the end of the contract is coming in, the end of June in 2023. We are at the end of a 5-year contract, and what we know is this contract, when we entered it 5 years ago, was below market. So where we are now, modest increases over the last 5 years is significantly below market. So we've been looking at ways to mitigate the jump in the contract costs for curbside collection. And one of the options that presented itself is the automated collection process. So the automated collection process is more efficient because it eliminates the person that slings the trash in the back. So it goes from a 2 or 3 person process for collection down to a 1 person collection process. So the operator of the truck is the one who actually operates the arm that dumps the bins at curbside, and there would be no other person with that truck at the time. So less labor is proven to be a little bit quicker because there's prescribed bins you have to use. So you end up getting a far more consistent, what people are putting out is far more consistent. And so what that all leads to is less cost to collect, a better price for the town to pay for that service. So in conversations with Pine Tree about the town's options in terms of, you know, what would things look like if we decided to bid it with our current process, and what are some of the options we talked about? Automated, we talked about options for pay as you throw, those sorts of things, and trying to get things more efficient and control volumes a little bit, which leads to lower costs for solid waste management. The response that we got back was that the direction that almost all municipal solid waste haulers are going is the automated collection process. He pointed out a few things like risk management is really the driving force for that. Yes, it's more efficient, but the trucks are super expensive, so it doesn't necessarily equal an immediate savings for the contractor. What it does do is reduce the risk of personal injury. And so the way it was described to me was that this was coming, and it was coming and its contract switched now versus in the future. So really the response from Pine Tree was that even if we did put it up as to continue our service the way we have it now, they probably wouldn't bid it that way. They would bid it as automated collection, and we would have to choose if we wanted to go that route or go with a different contractor. And options for other collection contractors at our scale is very limited, if non-existent.
So the last time we bid this, Waste Management did submit a bid, and at the time, I haven't gone back, but my recollection is it was more than twice,
Yeah,
almost three
almost
times
more
more expensive.
than the bid.
I come from a land where now this is the norm of having the trash cans that are all the same that get collected by the robot. Not really, but you know what I mean.
Still a person.
Still a person involved, but yeah. My question is, what is the cost of these barrels, and what happens to people who can't buy them?
So Pine Tree Casella would own the bins.
Okay,
So they provide the bins, maintain the bins, replace the bins when they're damaged, all those sorts of things. So the town, what the town has to commit to a 5 to 10 year period that we would do this. And then all of the capital outlay, buying of the truck, the distribution of the bins is all assumed by the contractor. So the resident or the town, the only liability the town has in that is contract value.
So, question I have, Rob, is when you go to this kind of a system, and I've spent time in 2 communities that use this system, and I can see the advantages to it, but you cannot get rid of anything that isn't in the bin.
Correct.
So, when I heard about our discussion of this, I just did a little mini survey and drove down Bennett Road and drove up around Lexington, Cromwell Drive, and drove up Winter Haven this past Thursday. And boy, there was a lot more than 2 barrels in many places. Now, I didn't look to see how full they were.
Right.
And I don't know what the gallon capacity of those barrels was. But I do worry a little bit about whether we are, by going in this direction, eliminating the opportunity for people to dispose of things they are now disposing of. Can you help me?
So the city of Bangor recently changed to this system. And they are commingled, so they don't separate recycling from any other kind of solid. So, and each resident gets a 96 gallon bin that is collected weekly.
One bin.
196 gallon bin, which is big.
Okay.
Just as good as that. That's 3 30 gallon bags that could fit in that, which is like 12 household trash can bags in a week,
So that's a lot bigger than the barrels that I'm using
Yes.
right now.
Yes.
And that most of
We're
our
proposing
residents are
to
using.
continue a separated recycling program, so you can take, we still propose to keep that on an every other week basis. So you'd be actually getting two bills,
Yeah.
one for recycling, one for MSW. So, it's even less than what, the city of Bangor uses right now. And from what I understand, conversion to that, had its, of course, transition period, but it's going well now. So,
So if I was gonna channel my inner Counselor Robertson, who couldn't be with us today, I would say that this is probably a first step in really beginning to promote a reduction of the amount of waste that people are making. Which is, if we look at the hierarchy, the first level on the municipal solid waste hierarchy. Not saying that everybody can reduce down to a single 30-gallon bag. That's not what we're saying, but I also think perhaps getting our residents to be thinking about, do I really need to bring that packaging in that's not recyclable? How am I taking care of my waste? So when I talked with Councilor Robertson as the chair of the Environment Committee about this, they see this as a first step in that idea of encouraging residents to reduce, reuse, and recycle before we get to the MSW piece.
The other question I have, kind of unrelated really to whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. I've never seen a single person in a truck that's doing this kind of
So,
work.
Val,
we have-
can
I've
you-
always seen two people
Yeah.
just the same.
Val, can you show the Casella video? We're gonna test
trucks in the
Bel's.
city of Bangor now are just.
One person. Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
The single operator of the vehicle, that person, their cameras in the cab, so that person can see the bin. When it dumps, they can actually see what's in the bin. There are, so there's a ton of automation. Right now, they get to touch what's in the bin as well, so that probably gets a little over. I think another part of this aspect, another aspect was the stop. So the truck has got GPS, and so each stop has a collection point that driver can make notes. So if somebody isn't buying their bags outside or whatever, we would keep a log of those stops and be able to reach out to them. Context.
So in the future, robot trash trucks keep tabs on you.
Yes.
So the government then-
So a system like this does away with my one tire a week, my,
Yeah, you don't have any tires right now, sorry.
I take one rimless tire.
Two rimless tires. All right, I'm sorry, that's my MRC hat saying that's not allowed.
Okay,
We do accept those at the landfill, so if council wanted to adjust the fee for those, when we went to this system, that would be.
so I work in Bangor and with adolescents who love to tell me about the amount of trash can piracy that they engage in when their family bins are full and they throw their trash in their bins. So I'm not sure that has that situation has been completely resolved. Yeah, I also wonder about some of our rural roads with less than stellar curves and how that might impact automated trash collection during snow season. But my bigger concern with this is that this continues to put us in a pattern of trash removal, which is dependent upon single residence, single trash can. We haven't explored anything like neighborhood or community receptacles, either for recycling or for municipal solid waste. And when we, just a couple months ago, and I know we're not talking about recycling that, but just a couple months ago, we did a big tour of 9D. They told us about their desperate need for fiber. I spoke with one of the managers up there who said, we'd love to expand their local fiber collection. And I think we exchanged some emails about that. I wonder how working with other non-traditional waste disposal partners might figure into our bigger idea.
So, in the grand scheme of things, this is the first I've heard of an idea of moving to neighborhood collection, whether it be dumpsters or collection points, and I guess Rob and I would have to look at that because I immediately would see some issue in terms of where does it?
What you're talking about is little mini transfer stations, which would all need to be permitted.
Located, permitted and maintained.
Yep.
So there's not,
Here's a transfer station.
if the municipality is having more places, more than one entity. If the municipality is citing something for more than one entity to use, it becomes a transfer station because you're moving your garbage. Yeah, you're moving your garbage into another place that we would then move, which is what a transfer station would be. So that would take, I think, some review. It would take a complete overhaul of the ordinance to kind of frame that.
You're saying in lieu of curbside collection, we'd ask residents to bring their trash to a certain number of.
I would say that it's probably, is it worth a discussion in saying, here are our options. Automated curbside, which limits the amount and kind of service that we have. Continued service like we have it now at an astronomical rate, even if we can find a vendor. Or some kind of curbside collection which reduces costs, or at least holds costs lower. You know, and doesn't subject the public to whatever restriction automated trash pickup line.
The other option we talked about is just doing it ourselves. Which,
Why, I once did that.
so we'd have to.
Could there be a
Line
variation
truck and staff.
of that just for cardboard or recycling board, kind of back to the fiber stuff that ND is looking for?
So we could put collection bins at the landfill for cardboard or specific fiber material. It would take a modification of the O&M manual, and I don't even think that.
That would be relatively easy.
So that's something that you could do outside of any of this, Jeff. You could just say, we value this, we want to try to do this, and therefore, Rob, see if how you would make this work. The other piece, I think, becomes, if that's something you want to look at, we could look at it. I think, I'm not sure we could do it just with ourselves and the current workload to get it done in time for a change for June. So then what we might end up doing is trying to negotiate with Casella for a shorter period of time as opposed to a full one.
Would there
So
be any ADA implications to something like that? I mean, like, I don't understand, like, I can probably throw a trash bag in my vehicle and drive it to a transfer station. Not that I necessarily want to do that, but I could, but I can see a lot of instances whether it's about ADA access or not, where it would be limiting for people to have to transport their trash to a location every week.
So lots of people do it. And, you know, I came from a community where we had a transfer station connected to a commercial, construction demolition debris landfill and a recycling depot where it all happened kind of on one complex. And what happened is people who didn't have vehicles to transport or didn't have the wherewithal to get it that far, and then their little tiny vendors sprung up with pickup trucks and other things to collect people's trash. So like my husband and I paid $5 a week and got a private vendor to come and pick up our trash and take it to the landfill.
I would just think that like living out in a more remote place where that is the norm, where there isn't curbside trash collection. Choosing to live in a place or living in a place like that means you are necessarily negotiating a lot of similar concerns like that. So it is part of the economy and part of the expectation of living in a community like that. I think that for folks who have other needs, living in a community close to services is an intentional act that supports the way that they live their lives. So that's where I would just be concerned about something like that.
When you started with ADA, I thought you were gonna go the same place I went to with Raw, which is, what about folks who can't manage
Well,
a
that too.
96 gallon and maybe don't need it, right? So if you think I need it, but I can't manage it, then I think of things like if I couldn't move it, I would take it down empty and put stuff in it, right? Like you kind of could move stuff to it. But if it truly is a matter of I don't need it and I can't manage it. One of the things we talked about is working with Casella to arrange for smaller containers.
We could, a resident could request a smaller bin if that was. If they were-
That would still work.
The robot could pick up the small bin too.
Quick question, maybe a little bit off, but why do we not commingle? Why Bangor commingles we don't? I assume we get sorted and all that.
No, so,
That's something.
when we changed to Coastal Resources of Maine and the new facility came on board. That is a situation where everything got dumped in the same place and recyclables were pulled out. And a lot of the waste was also, all the organics were changed to something else. So there were value added kind of recycling happening. When Coastal Resources of Maine exceeded 50% recycling rate for all the material coming in, a few of the communities in our area decided to go all in one bin, figuring they didn't have to pay for the recycling collection, and it was all very close in price, so it made sense for them to do all of one bin. Rob and I talked about it, and we talked with council at the time about our concern that we wanted to see Coastal maintain that high level of recycling for a period of time before we took all the education and training of our residents and upended it. So Orono has been maintaining a sorted collection for single stream collection for recycling at a significant cost. We're paying more than double what we had anticipated we were going to pay. Because we wanted recycling to go where recycling is supposed to go and waste to be disposed of as it had to be in this period of waiting to get the clean.
Once the plant is up and running, by contract, recycling is accepted at a lower rate per ton than MSW. So it still, in some ways, makes sense to separate it. And you continue that process if you're going to. Right now, we're paying twice as much for recycling per ton than we do the cost to process that stuff.
If you remember, we had this discussion during the budget talks, because we significantly increased the tip fee for recycling. The other piece I would just say is that when you recycle, you hope most of it gets recycled. A large amount of it is being kicked out of the process.
So we're paying twice as much and it may or may not be getting recycled. Is that an accurate statement?
Yep, and that statement hasn't changed from the budget process.
I guess it almost sounds like we don't have a choice, but I do, because if we go up a bid, it's probably what they're gonna do. Sounds like you're saying it's not another vendor, but it seems like we should, if we go up to bid, it seems like we should ideally have multiple vendors. It seems like understanding what the delta is on them. I mean, personally, it seems like 96 gallon, I can't picture exactly, but I have seen the barrels in Bangor, they seem pretty big. Seems like that's regular for one family, I don't know, but that, it seems like a heavier lift, having a place where people have to go, like a much more of a change for community members. I think if we say, okay, bring your stuff here versus, okay, we're going to these barrels. That sounds kind of like a bigger change that might have a harder time in my view. But I guess I think that sounds interesting. Doesn't sound bad. If there's a possibility of quoting both ways, I think that's always good. But if that's not a possibility, I guess it's a new point.
Both ways.
The current
Keep the
method.
current.
Yeah, and you know, again, it's always better to have multiple vendors, but if there are no multiple vendors, but it seems like I've heard ads for different places, but I don't know if they do.
So one of the things you're gonna find is that a lot of, there are like 3 different vendors in here that have different names on the truck that are all owned by Casella, number 1. And number 2, there are lots of places that will do even commercial pickup, but don't want to take on a municipal contract, because with a municipal contract, you have to have a lot more in contingency in terms of redundancy.
Yeah.
When you've got a few thousand bags of trash out, it can't be, we'll get to it next week.
Yeah.
Kind of have a trash monopoly.
They do, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to say that.
I said it, so you don't have to.
Do we contract for, okay, so if we were to enter into a contract for automated waste disposal, each household gets a 96 gallon barrel, except for
one for stuff.
yes, I'm sorry. Except for those households who opt for the smaller one.
Then that would be something they could ask for, yeah.
Yeah, so, but our budget is based on the 96 gallons.
So the budget is based on the number of stops for the
Okay.
collection.
Yeah.
Tip fee is not part of that. Tip fee is a separate, we tip what we pay for what we are gonna actually tip.
Thank you.
Yeah, we pay a flat rate for the collection. Per month.
Is there an accommodation for, sort of apartments, or like, I'm thinking about the Wilson Center where we have multiple people who live there and throw, epic events most nights of the week. Sometimes we might need 2 barrels.
Disorderly property.
Yeah.
So. By ordinance, it's. Residential properties, 4 units or less.
Okay, and a church,
So
what does a church count as?
Church should be counting as a commercial,
As a commercial property, okay,
so you should. Private collection, but
okay,
we
that's
don't-
good to know.
Yeah. So as, part of that process, the city of Bangor actually did identify a number of places that didn't qualify under their ordinance that got sorted out of the collection, and actually some that came in. Some of the mid-sized residential properties, so 3 or 4 didn't want to deal with 8 bins in their parking lot, so they chose to not participate and to get a private dumpster for their.
But
um,
what you're saying
But-
is it's per unit, right? So if you had a 3-unit apartment building, you're not having to go into 1 bin. They would have 3 MSW bins
Yes.
and 3
Per unit.
recycling per unit.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's kind of an important distinction as well. So my question for you is,
Go.
I heard the idea of doing an RFP with kind of an A and a B, which we absolutely could do that we do that often. The idea of the mini transfer stations or even one big transfer station that we make everybody go to is new for me. But is that something that you want us to evaluate? Because, you know, our job is to bring you services that you want, not.
I feel like 10 or 15 years ago, I looked at that.
Yeah.
I
I think that may have been part of the big thing,
We were talking about the landfill
yep,
construction for 2012. We talked about potentially going to that, because we need to create a transfer site. And the logical place would be at the landfill.
It seems like a tall order for 2 months.
It seemed like, well, it also seemed like there were 6, maybe 7 digits associated with that estimate. I'll
Maybe-
see what I can find.
Yeah, I guess if it's easy to find, I'd be interested in talking about it as an alternative, but I don't think it should require a lot of staff time if it's just a pie in the sky here. I think I would be more interested in having a follow-up to the conversation that we had with 9D about the potential for them accepting some of our fiber waste in the future.
so I think that that's something that we could facilitate with our environmental services coordinator. And have Public Works look at whether or not it's feasible to put a cardboard fiber type.
Maybe work with MRC to
Yeah,
make a larger.
Yep.
Change.
so I think we can do that without further council action if you're comfortable with that. I don't imagine council would have a problem with us further pulling recyclable waste out of the waste stream. Okay, so what I'm hearing is Rob, go forth and bid with bid alternates. And if we can easily find the data from before that you looked at, then let's share that so folks can see where we are. And staff will take on some combination of us or us and MRC trying to begin working on this idea of cardboard. I would not expect it before spring. That's just not a kind of feasible thing.
Sounds like a plan.
Is that what you need?
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, sir.
We ready to move on?
Yes.
So then we'll move on to proposal to allocate remaining American Rescue Plan Act ARPA funds for a combined sewer and sanitary sewer infrastructure project in the area of Hillside, Pond, and Crosby Streets.
So you are going to see my team act fast to be flexible, because I'm gonna change some things around on them. But Belle has a slide for anybody who's watching about the American Rescue Plan Act funds. So I want to start by saying, to put this in context, the town received $1,141,870 in American Rescue Act funds. So far, the town has encumbered $400,331, which you have this, Leo, you're welcome to write as much as you want, but you've got it on a slate, okay. If you look at the sheet, the gray, or on the printed sheet, I think it's the first 3 items, are items that are fully complete and the money has been spent. The next 2 items are items that are underway and contracts have been written, and really there's not, at least for a portion of that public safety building assessment that has been encumbered. And then we have the pool filter system and the deck repair, which is kind of delayed because the vendor that Rob wanted to use is,
Well, we're struggling with getting even more than one vendor to quote this, and one of the quotes that came back from one of the same company that did our liner a few years ago was 3 times that amount, so we're working through trying to get this project done, but
so I have not done 3 times. I gave you another 20,000.
but that we wouldn't do it if that makes sense.
So, the next are known or expected, budget overruns, which I have at almost $33,000. The, one is absolutely known and we're bringing it forward because, we're hoping to put it on the council agenda for Monday night, which is a change order of almost $13,000 for the tech upgrade to the council chamber. And Bell can speak to that tonight if you need, or if you're good with at least taking it forward to council on Monday night, next Monday night. And then I had allocated another 20,000 for overruns in the pool filter and deck repair, which leaves us with $708,549. So that's what we have. Council has said that they wanted all discussions about they wanted discussions, to have public discussions about how we're spending the ARPA money. So we did that with the items that have been encumbered. And then, so one of the items we wanted to bring forward as a recommendation, understanding that if we're talking about expending the rest of the money, council would probably want to have a more robust conversation at a council meeting in some form, is a series of infrastructure investment all in the Webster neighborhood. And so if you flip your page, your sheet, you will see 4 projects that we are asking you to consider. And I thought if we could, we would kind of walk through these. We're considering funding, if you wanted to use ARPA money, it's 1.75 million, which as you see is we don't have that, right? In ARPA money. So we would estimate using the balance of the ARPA money. We have money left in existing, the 2020 general obligation bond for infrastructure, and a little bit of money is supposed to be remaining in the Maine Municipal Bond Bank loan that we've already taken. So it would be great to get those off the books first and then move to reserve funds, both Public Works Infrastructure Reserve and WPCF Reserve. So that's how we've kind of laid this out in terms of funding. What I'd like to do is to just have Rob and Chris walk you through these projects, starting with Rob, and Bell's got the map called Combined. And I'll start with existing condition.
Quick question, are these all on our capital plan? Are these
So,
items all on there? And if so, what year will they associated with?
so I think these have been kind of off the plan because they seemed way too big to do.
Couldn't fit them on the plan, so they were looking for opportunity to have them.
Can you make that a little
There
bit?
is paving, you'll see Hillside, Pond and Peters on the capital plan for paving improvements in not next year, the year after that. But not the significant reconstruction of the drainage that we talked about here.
One
So,
more,
oh yeah,
is there a spending deadline on these funds?
there is. It's October of 2024.
So they have to be spent on things, they can't be spent like
So-
offsetting
At the very,
taxes or,
yes, no, they cannot be used to offset
so we have to
taxes.
spend them on a thing.
Yeah, you cannot use them to fund retirement. You can't use them for just a general. We want to reduce taxes. The first section of expenditures that we made had to fall within a very clearly defined, very constricted allowance of use. They then revised the the allowed uses when they finalized the rule, which allowed us to take a $10 million deduct. It has to be used for municipal purpose, so we can't use it just to pay things down, we can't use it to save for a rainy day, so we can't go into reserves. But it can be used for things that the government would generally use its money for. So it's a much broader.
And we have talked a number of times about using them for one-time expenditures.
Yeah.
So that you're not buying something with it now, but you gotta do the same thing 3 years from now with your own money.
So we're seeing some places wanting to use this to start programming. And the concern with that is you start programming with ARPA money that has to be spent in 2 years. In 2 years, you're gonna have a cliff that you're gonna, fund.
And on this, just, well, sorry to keep butting in before we get started, but on that point, I do think it's important that this is for COVID relief. That's what the whole funds were originally, the intent of these funds. That's what it was, correct? Relief, it is, that is what ARPA funds were designed for.
They were designed for COVID relief and the economic impact from that.
Yeah,
For municipalities, when they instituted the final rule, one of the things that they talked about were, what are things that we can do that, number one, one of the areas was around our first responders and making first responders, salary increases for first responders. Another area was around, the actual response to COVID. Then there was all of the new stuff that has come up, which is where the Zoom room kind of came in, where everybody was trying to make government more accessible and prepare for a future pandemic. The third was around how can you, within the scope of what you do, reduce the impact, economic impact of your service and services to the public. So it was really asking us to look at that lower income level kind of issue. And future bolstering future economic, the rebound of the pandemic. So when we look at this, you know, the county was given somewhere in the magnitude of like $30 million. Bangor, I think, was $10 million. And as it should be for them, because they're looking at service, they provide public health services, they provide, they have a framework for kind of being the county, you know, Bangor is kind of the county service center. The county getting the amount of money that the county got is because in most places where ARPA funds came through, counties provided huge amounts of services. And in Maine, that just isn't
It's
the
kind of a
case. Yeah, we made that argument. We
they've
made,
got a $20 million budget and there's a $30 million ARPA.
so I think it's a little bit, it's a different kind of place.
Yeah. it's kind of good.
And
But I guess
so
my point is that, I wonder, I'm not sure that we've done any like community assessment impact to, and I'm thinking of the $6 gallon fuel this winter, increased electric costs this winter, groceries. To me, that feels more like a COVID related somewhat impact to our community that is more related than sewer lines or drainage.
So
lines.
even in the most restrictive of the rule, sanitary and storm drainage was specifically called out along with broadband.
Which is a little, okay.
I mean, those were,
that doesn't make a
When
lot
it,
of
at
sense
the
in my
very
mind.
beginning, when
I
they
think
were,
the idea is drinking water and like basic infrastructure for sanitary and health reasons not failing in communities, I think is the impetus behind. But it is specifically called out that communities should consider using it for stormwater projects.
So I think we ought to
Yeah.
move on to hear what our folks have to say about this item, and then we can discuss how we feel about it.
So to orient you,
So the portion of the drainage system that we're talking about addressing with this project starts at Pond Street. So Pond Street has basically one drain that drains all of it. That runs down in between two properties. Behind a couple of houses, makes a turn. Almost underneath somebody's garage, comes down to Hillside Road, not Hill Street anymore. Hillside Road, then goes through 3 or 4 little catch basins that have been cobbled together over the years. Combines again into one near the middle of Hill Street, goes back again between 2 other properties where it abuts the rise of the railroad. And so that is actually an open ditch, so all the water that system collects discharges into the backyards of the people that live on the railroad side of Hill Street. And then that ever so slowly makes its way down to North Main Avenue, where there's an existing outlet, corrugated metal, 12-inch corrugated metal pipe that has failed, so we tried to camera it, we couldn't get the camera through. So it's in such poor condition that it's either working very poorly or not at all, which is contributing to a significant amount of water getting backed up behind those properties. So that's the current condition.
Where does it go from there, Raj?
It goes then it goes underneath the railroad tracks, all the way down to where it crosses Penobscot Street, and then outlets into the Penobscot River, where that arrow is.
That's the part you're saying is collapsed.
no,
No,
it's not.
the part that, well, if you were to look at the end of the pipe where it's on the riverbank, there's only the top piece left there. So there's pretty significant corrosion of that pipe all the way out. But we tried to get the camera down from the Hillside Road side down to see where it went underneath the railroad tracks and couldn't successfully get the camera through there. So I'm thinking that the failure is like under the tracks.
It's pretty gnarly.
So one of the issues we have is that the neighborhood is dealing with significant water.
So, right, the people on the upper side report that the area where it comes down from pond and then goes across to between those 2 basins is constantly wet, which probably indicates to me that those pipes are failing as well. The person where it makes the corner near the garage, basically right next to their foundation, deals with water in the basement constantly.
To the backyards of the people
And then-
who are on Hillside, between Hillside and the railroad,
Yeah,
are just, their backyards a lake.
correct. And I've had good conversation with a few of those residents who are patiently waiting for us to make some improvements there. Challenge was dealing with, it's the outlet, so crossing underneath the railroad tracks is a significant undertaking, so that's one of the reasons why the project's cost is so high. But if we can't get underneath the tracks, we did evaluate through survey whether we could move the drainage the other way and go back toward Crosby Street and take advantage of the outfall that you can see just before the tracks on the right, but we don't have gravity to that location, so it wouldn't work. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to make the improvements on the upper piece, still have the issue with still have no place for the water to go. So getting underneath the railroad tracks is kind of a key part to the success of this project.
Can I ask, have you had communications with the railroad at this point or no?
Not yet.
Because somebody came in, I forget who it was, and also a friend that was former railroad guy. Said that they're gonna be up there, right now it's
They
like a
are.
10-mile-an-hour track or something, so there's talk of some stuff happening there that. Maybe we're not gonna all love, but I wonder if that is an opportunity to.
So the railroad has changed hands. And so the new owners are committing to getting this piece of track from Lincoln down below us into the Bangor Depot up to snuff, and that includes a significant project that's gonna replace something like 90 crossings and railroad ties all the way down to make so they can up the speed limit back to and safely do it. So I don't think this project would necessarily conflict or there would be any benefit one way or the other, because the railroad engineering is still gonna require us to follow a certain process to get that pipe under the tracks. It may be, from the sounds of things, my conversation with regional maintenance director, it might be a little bit less difficult than it has been in the past with previous owners. So I'm hopeful that maybe we can do it a little bit significantly less expensive than we budgeted for. But right now, we're just working on a very high level budget that it sets a lot of money aside for that process. And as you can see, so the green line shows the path of the new drainage. It would actually eliminate the discharge point in the backyards of the people on the Penobscot River side of the of Hillside Road, which should help dry up that, and then we make some improvements to the ditch line. And replace that, the basin that feeds into that just before it goes up the tracks. So then everyone can see drier conditions in their yards.
Would hillside still drain that way? Is that what you're saying? Where would the drain, the actual hillside street go?
Maybe you can go back to the existing conditions now. Right now, hillside discharges down where you see where the line goes down in the middle.
Yeah.
Right now, all that water just discharges there. The new system would carry all that water to North Main and down and its track.
Except for what's on hillside, or would you, except for what's on hillside, no?
Well, we
You would
collect
make
all that,
hillside, I'll go
we
back.
can collect all that water, take it down. Because there'd be curbs and sidewalk and stuff like that.
To hold
The
everything.
water that falls in their yards is gonna be there, but
Yeah.
we wouldn't be discharging half the neighborhood in the backyard. Yeah, Pond Street would be carried the same path, but would be brought out to North Main Street instead of discharging. Inside.
In this construction, is there sidewalk work? This is just about sewer.
So we had, in the capital.
I mean, I know that's in the
plan,
capital plan.
That's in there, so
It might
it couldn't be funded with ARPA
it'd
funds,
have to
but
be,
it's gonna happen simultaneously. We would coordinate those projects
So
if
that's,
it was funded.
That's
so
the
that's
stormwater.
stormwater, and now in order of priority. Which I think is 2, 3, 4 on the list.
Peter Street, so good evening. Peter Street has been an ongoing problem. It's a piece of pipe, it's not real long, it's a little less than 700 feet. The problem with it is it's very old,
Val, can you pull up that map, please?
Peter Street.
Yeah.
So it's very old, it doesn't run like a typical sewer, the whole street connected to the other streets. It starts on that street and it starts to travel down, and then it turns and goes between two homes. And then it follows cross country to North Main Street. The problem with it is it's very old, it's made out of clay, it's broken. It's not a very big pipe, we can't get our equipment in it to maintain it. It's full of roots. And when we have wet weather and surcharges, there are 2 homes on that street that get sewage in the basement. So I've kind of put that as high priority. They couldn't even get their camera equipment in to look at it. We know it's 6 inches, but transitions to 5, which is not good. And 6 and 5 is not big enough for our equipment.
Well, it's the other one. So we're ready to transition,
So
all right? So the next one is an upsize, which is more of an economic development project. So it's the long piece you
So
see
the little
here.
piece there is, that's a 10-inch sewer line that was installed by a man named Stan McMillan. He developed a piece of property there, Washburn Place. And he installed this line to serve that development himself. He owned it. And then the town took ownership after it was complete. So he made a 10-inch line from Washburn Place all the way to Crosby Street by way of hillside. Most of it's cross country, but the last 500 feet is that piece of hillside that goes into Treats Falls. The problem with it is since he's built it, 3 8-inch lines have been connected to it because of the development that's happened on Park Street. And it's resulted in the last 1,000 feet of that pipe being at capacity. So if any more development is added to that pipe, you know, if a pipe is full and you keep trying to put water in it, it's not going to stay in the pipe. And it's more likely going to end up on the ground, splashing up on a manhole cover one night when it's raining. So that needs to be upside. So that last 1,000 feet is basically a bottleneck. Once it gets to Crosby, it turns to 15, and then when it gets to Penobscot, it turns to 18. So that
This,
1,000 feet needs to be upside before any more development happens in the Park Street area.
so when we look at planning, Park Street is the place that we are suggesting can take more residential and commercial development. So we were at a point with the Edge, which was recently permitted and then the permits lapsed, where they were going to tip us over capacity, so we were gonna have to upsize the line. Because of the way our ordinance is structured, we could have picked up an impact fee. That impact fee is their percentage of the total design flow, which I think was a $17,000 contribution to a $515,000 project. So it to suggest that future development will pay for the upgrade just is not a reasonable, it's so much design flow going in there. But we are definitely at capacity with that line at this point.
So you said 3 8-inch line has come in, 8-inch lines have come in from those other developments, and there's, that seems to me there'd be an impact fee that should be covering that or going back to those. I mean,
Nope,
They pay
because
connection fees.
they paid connection fees. The impact fee wasn't assessed because they were within the design flow of the system. So in order to assess an impact fee, you have to move the town beyond the design flow. And I realize Chris has been here for a long time, so he talks about the 3. What we're looking at is a 10-inch main and an 8-inch main going into an.
It's, yeah, it's a 10 that originally went to the 15 at Crosby Street. But it has since had 3 8-inch tied to it. So it's not big enough. And the plan is to upsize that long piece to 12.
So, questions about that?
I guess a follow on from Leo's question is I'm curious what the opportunities would be for revising our fee structure for new development so that there's more that the town is bringing in to anticipate changes like this that do go, grow years from now from development.
So council could look at changing its connection fee, which is the only avenue it really has. Keep in mind that those connection fees are part of the calculation that developers make when deciding to come into a community. So, it increases the cost of development. The other thing that council should do, if it was gonna do that in concert with that, is instead of trying to incrementally raise the rate structure, it should significantly raise the rate structure, because right now, those connection fees have been paying for basic maintenance of the system, infrastructure maintenance of the system, as opposed to upsizing.
Because right now,
Bigger,
the way the fees are set up, the connection fees are significant
they are,
for.
So-
What was the connection fee for the hour?
100 oh. That one was huge, the one for the, I wanna say in the $300,000 range.
Yeah.
The one for the edge that didn't get built was $117,000. To put that in perspective, a normal home is in the 1,500 range. So, the reason that this hit hit our radar for, the majority of this ARPA funding is twofold. Number one, it allows us to incrementally bring in an increased rate structure in sewer. It, number two, opens up a whole avenue of greater development, which would increase the tax base, which should help spread the tax rate a little bit better. So what we were thinking is when you think about the ARPA argument that Leo has made, which is a legit argument, but it's looking at longer term, how one of the concerns council has had is that we're pricing lower income folks out of the ability to live in Orono. So these were kind of, that one in particular, is really about trying to open up an area of development and help maintain some sustainability in the sewer. That's one of the issues we have, is that we don't want to raise rates because it's hard for people to pay for sewer rates, but the sewer system needs constant infrastructure investment. And we are almost out of the sewer reserve.
So I have not heard of any low income housing development that's going on out there. Right,
Low income?
yeah,
No,
I
we've
think
got a couple of housing
Yeah.
developments in the pipeline.
I think I just referred to your comment that the idea is this helps low income, I think that's what you said.
So-
I'm receiving it, but-
So, Leo, let me go a little bit slower and try to more formulate a better thought for you in that argument. It is not that it is facilitating low income housing. It is that in growing the tax base with additional housing units and commercial, which is where we are pushing with zoning and other action that the council has taken. Development along the Park Street corridor. The hope is that we are gonna grow the tax base, which should allow us to slow or, dare I say, reduce the tax rate. But at least slow the growth of the tax rate. Number one, and number two, the goal in subsidizing sewer activity is to allow us a more incremental increase in the sewer rate as opposed to hitting people all at once, which is what we will need to do to sustain these projects, to be able to fund these projects moving forward.
So we don't have an option to just not do it.
So I would say this, the Peters to North Main Avenue,
People have sewage in their
you,
basements.
you don't have an option on that. We're gonna have to do that one. And the upsize eventually, you know, one of these complexes is going to come in or development is going to come in that will require us to do that
And that eventually gets passed on
to the ratepayer.
taxpayer.
So that, I just
Which
want,
theoretically this is, I think, I mean, I guess it's how you look at it, but the first one's $750,000 and you've got $700,000 we're talking about, so. Let's say we put it all into the storm sewer upgrade, and that's still a taxpayer issue, right?
So I'm not
I'm
suggesting we
not
put
following.
any ARPA money into the storm sewer, but they're all connected into one neighborhood.
Say that again, we're not suggesting using any ARPA funding for any of this.
Not for the first one.
Combination of existing bond proceeds and reserve funds.
Only items 2 and 3 are proposed to be.
Okay.
ARPA funded.
We haven't gotten to the last
Yes.
item, I don't believe.
So the last little piece of.
The other leg of both sides, so that was. In the engineers looking at what they could do for raw. We had them look at some other pieces of. Hill Street sewer that we knew was dilapidated and clay. And. It didn't look good, it's bad, as far as clay goes. It's not a problem for us right now. There's no backups in anything. But it's gonna be. And we've got the zone, we're gonna be in doing this upsize on Hillside. Just do the whole thing. I know it adds a lot of cost. But when they did Crosby Street line, they ran into a problem with Hillside. The line tying into it was in such bad shape that they had to keep chasing it back until they had good pipe to connect to. So they replaced about 300-foot line then. It was added to Crosby line.
Time infiltration from there.
Yeah, there's a lot of infiltration with clay pipe that's cracked, takes in a lot of water.
And if newer counselors are thinking, clay pipe, that's amazing. There, I learned that there were some carved wooden pipes in Forest Ave, is that, yeah.
Wooden
So
pipes.
the clay pipes are
Classic.
height of technology.
So that part of the project is, you know, it helps with CSO maintenance. That flows.
And if we're thinking about paving Hillside, it would not make a lot of sense to cover up. Given the condition of that pipe, it would make sense to cover that.
How long a stretch is that, Chris, that last item that
That
will say?
is, there's two runs.
That's okay.
About 400 feet, 120 feet. So, have some photographs.
I didn't.
So when I look at the sheet that we received, I see a lot of use of reserve funds. Yeah, do we have those reserve funds?
So that's the big question, and why, when I asked Bob, is this the most important thing that we need to address? The answer I got was about Main Street, right? Because that's where those funds are coming.
Yeah, in context, I mean, the study that we're just about to start on the Route 2 corridor project, which could end up leveraging a significant investment in grant funds. Includes the scope that these funds were originally set aside for. So a couple years ago, we set that $600,000 aside to fund the Main Street pedestrian improvements. All of those improvements and more will be included in this next project. So those funds wouldn't have to be spent on that if council wants to.
Wait, can you say that again? Are we slowing down the work on the Main Street corridor? Or did I just?
So what we're saying is, the Main Street corridor project, would have its own match.
Okay.
And, it would be, we've talked, it's a, what, $2.7 to $3 million
Right.
match for that. We don't have the funds for that. So if council was gonna move forward with the Main Street project, it would likely have to be through a bond. I'm sorry, yeah, the Route 2 plan, yeah.
So those aren't freed up until we have that discussion about whether moving forward with the bond, is that accurate, or am I missing something?
So it is either we're moving forward with the bond, or we would have to reallocate, raise money, maybe over 2 years. To
Yeah.
put that back in.
Just the pedestrian improvements from the bridge to Kelly Road. Was about a $1.2 million project. We pared it down, prioritizing. Crosswalk improvements and adding a few crosswalks, and so really important. Sidewalk work down to 600,000. But that was before we had. Before we knew about the possibility of availing ourselves of the state grant funds. So we were gonna have to try to piecemeal sidewalk improvements. And the first step was going to be that $600,000 project that would have done. With crosswalks. Town.
Which I think you just said. Those funds we would not need there, and that's what you're talking about using here. Did I hear that correctly?
If council decided to move forward with the large Route 2 project, which is the $30 billion grant project, we'd be responsible for 10% match on that. And if we were to, so we need to raise, upwards of $3 million, and so we suggested we would bond for that, so we no longer need these reserve funds for that.
And those reserve funds
Because
would
that
only
would
be a small part of what you need anyway.
But it
Yes.
looks like they'd be 700, 800,000.
No, they would be 550,000. The
Not plus the-
general, no, the 195 of the general obligation bond has to be spent. That, I can't hold that for another 2 or 3 years.
Right.
That has to be spent.
And then the 250 that you're seeing at the bottom is a different reserve.
Totally different reserve.
For me, I feel like I need to see this whole picture, but because I'm definitely not hearing it in my mind from what you're saying. Where the funds are coming and going.
So $550,000 is coming from Public Works Infrastructure Reserve.
Which is right now designated for this Route 2 thing.
As designated,
Set aside for the Main Street pedestrian sidewalk project.
the 250,000, because it's a sanitary project, wouldn't be funded from town reserve. It's funded from WPCF infrastructure reserves. So all of this was designed to tell you what we're thinking about if you ask us what the highest need is right now. This is what staff sees as the highest need. Now, we punt it to council to determine how it wants to come up with its own highest need. We have fulfilled our obligation to tell you what we think the highest need is.
And I would qualify with that saying, the highest need is otherwise addressed already. So
Or in process of being addressed.
And this is timely because we have to spend the 195 in some sort of short order, and if council decides to go the route of the bond, we also have to take that into the same kind of short order.
So,
And we have to spend the ARPA funds, but.
Yes,
yeah, so the bond timeline, we would need to get the planning grant that we've all got under, that council agreed to, and we have engaged Sebago Technics to do. We need that document as the prospectus for the bond before we could begin the bond process. So we've got to wait, and then we got to hurry up.
Which we haven't technically committed to this bond, but we committed to this first step of doing stuff.
Jeff, you look like you're thinking.
no, I'm just saying, okay, so this is in front of us tonight because of the need we have in our infrastructure and also the need we have to expend the ARPA funds and the existing bond.
So I'm giving you enough time that it's not like you have to make a decision at this moment. We are trying to lay this out. I was charged with what I thought would be, here are the laundry list of priorities. We have consistently come back to these impacting residents or the town's ability to move forward with council planning. I didn't touch on public safety issues or anything else. Right now, these seem like these are the most important issues facing us. And really in line with the initial legislation that was passed.
So next step on this,
So I think the next step, whether it is however we want to get there, would be for council to decide how I've come up with,
Yeah.
this is what staff thinks the most important priority would be. Now, we've punted it, how do you want to come up with what you think the most important priority would be? And I would kind of punt that to you. From a timing perspective, I think if we move in an orderly way over the next few months, we would be in good step. So this has to happen.
so it would seem to me that a next step might be a further discussion of the use of ARPA funds at a regularly scheduled council meeting, where the recommendation from town staff would be a part of it, and then whatever other people may want to suggest, whether it's council members or members of the public, for us to consider. That would be a meeting that we wouldn't be making a decision, but we would be again getting additional information and looking further at this and whatever other.
That
things might
sounds
come
like
in.
a public hearing. That sounds like a kind of a public hearing that would get advance notice to the public. You would take input from council and the public. We would try to.
Yeah,
come
I
back
think
to
it
you.
really is. I think public hearing would be the way to go. Which would not happen until
So I think,
December,
yeah, I
probably.
think we would call it, if the intent is to get notice to the public, we would call it next week.
Right.
For December, which would then give us a committee in December to consider it. And you could begin to put orders or give direction, January. Does that work?
That works for me.
For a timing standpoint? Does that work for you? From a timing standpoint?
Yeah, I think we have lots of needs in our community, and we have finite resources, and this is an exercise in trying to match what we think are the most important, highest priority needs with the limited resources that we have in a responsible way, so it takes some time. Okay, are we ready to move on?
I have a young person waiting for a ride when we got here, so I'm gonna have to.
Absolutely.
Sorry to miss this. I'm in favor of expending the state active forfeiture funds, but I'm sorry, I have to. Make that.
Thank you. So the last item on this agenda is acceptance of the Edward Ryan Memorial Justice Assistance Grant and use of police asset forfeiture funds to purchase police technology equipment.
So I'm gonna try to do this as quickly as I can, but if I'm going too fast, please stop me. The Burn Jag Justice Assistance Grant Program allocates a certain amount of money based on a variety of factors to Penobscot County, every county, but Penobscot is the one we're talking about every year. And then each town gets an allocation of that. This year, our allocation was $2,254.50, just because they wanted to make my accounting not look pretty. So we have to give back kind of, this is what we will spend the money on. This year, we want to spend that money on a tough book or a mobile laptop for law enforcement. It is an allowable use under the program. The tough book costs $2,835, which leaves a balance of $580.50 for the laptop. The laptops used in police vehicles require a docking station, so something that will secure them, but also allows them from an ergonomic standpoint. To use the cruiser as an office essentially. That docking station installed costs $1,350 approximately. And we would have exhausted our JAG fund. So then we would ask for that from the state asset forfeiture. So in total, we would be suggesting a total project of $4,185, $2,254.50 paid for from JAG funds, and $1,930.50 paid for out of the state asset forfeiture funds. Thus far, we have, as of today, unencumbered state asset forfeiture funds of $5,420.96. The proposed expense of $1,930.50 would leave a remaining balance in that account of $3,490.46.
How many of these?
One.
One unit.
So a tough book, when you look at it, does not look like a laptop. It is reinforced. It is designed as a mobile application to dock into that docking station, to be pulled out, to be used for a variety of purposes, and then brought back to the docking station and put back in. But yeah, I once had to use a tough book laptop because mine was not working. It was a really fun endeavor because they tend to be a little bit smaller and heavily reinforced.
So where would it be housed? Where would it be?
One of the new cars. So what my thought behind spending this money is that with all of our new cars, part of the purchase of what we're asking when we come to council has been purchasing new laptops. Because the computers that we have in our cars, we've had in there since I think August of 2014. So if Bell chimed in from the IT world back there, that would be a significantly dated system. And my concern is that this is the last frontline car that doesn't have this laptop system in it. And with the backlog that we're having and the struggle that we're having with getting products and cruisers and stuff like that, even when we start game planning for the FY24, right? FY24 budget, I think pretty conservatively, it could be another year and a half that we could have this, old computer system in our cars. And so I figured the burn JAG grant money would be a good use of our money to get all of our frontline cars the same as far as their technology goes, with a relatively minimal expense on the town side. And they're a good system. It's probably a little bigger than what Sophie's computer is. But like she said, they have the built-in Wi-Fi cards. Their operating systems are a lot faster than what we have right now because our system is dated and old, and we haven't been experiencing significant problems. But in my limited experience in technology, when it goes awry, it's going to go, and that means that the people out working the road every day aren't going to have what they need to be as effective as they can be.
Questions, comments?
Have you considered purchasing a refurbished used tough book? I looked at some prices and it seemed as though it might be possible to get that kind of system for within the JAG program funds budget solely.
They are, and I don't have a good answer for why I didn't explore the refurbished program. It's just not what we've normally done. We've always purchased new products because we've had good
I have an answer for that.
Oh, geez, I forgot Bill was there.
I'm just sitting back here behind the curtain. So we used to purchase refurbished computers for use at the, in the various offices. And we discovered that we never got the same kind of life out of them that we would get out of a new computer. And then the warranty is frequently, you might get a year instead of 3 years. So we changed our purchasing policy for regular computers to only purchase new because of the kind of unreliability of the refurbished computers. And then when you're talking about a computer that is in a cruiser, and particularly in a frontline cruiser, they are used 24/7. The reliability of those is critical. If an officer is in that car and pulls somebody over and the computer goes down, then they are seriously handicapped in trying to handle that call. So because of our experience with refurbished equipment and the fact that our warranty doesn't last as long, and typically what you're looking at is kind of outdated specs on that type of equipment, we have set up policy to only purchase the new.
Thank you, Bill. Any other questions? All right, seems reasonable to me.
So I just wanna, from a process standpoint, what we would be asking is to move this forward to council.
Yep. Oh, any objection, we'll move it forward. Okay, that takes care of our regular business, I do believe.
So I did give you fair warning
Yeah, we
that
did,
I had,
20 minutes of maybe.
I will try to pare this down, but I want to make sure people hear some things. I sent a recap of the DEI workshop to counselors. I would hope if people who were not there could take a look at it, because you have an opportunity to influence the process by tomorrow. The other, I need to reach out to Vinyl Appleby and Dee, but we did get a price back from the engineer about the work that would have to be done for the sale. So they are offering a scope. It's $8,500 for the DEP permitting and back and forth with the applicant. The reason it's that high is because they do believe they're gonna have to go on the other land, all of it together, look at it, and determine what deed restrictions or requirements would have to be in there with regard to what the underground infiltration system. Be another $2,500 if they need to set new pins. We normally, if we are there and deeding a piece of our property, we tend to deed it with pins so that there isn't a question. And then there is also a local planning board process. I was able to confirm that with planning, that we would have to go back to the local planning board site plan review as well. They are carrying enough for a normal process. I would argue that the town's process would probably go through in one night and not require quite as back and forth, just because their town constituent is going to be carrying the water for the planning department anyway, but they're carrying 4,000, so that we might get that. I think he carried 2 nights, so I think we probably get that down to 2,000. I have not gotten into whether or not we can save money in other ways. The total there is $15,000, and based on my conversation with this group before, I'm just going to pass that along to Dee and let them know that that's the estimate that we received from the engineer. Want to make you aware that I have broken a contract with Port City Architects for the assessment of the public safety building. We were not getting the service that we wanted. We got the initial report after months of asking for it. It does not meet our need. It is incredibly vague in some places and incredibly detailed in others, and misses whole swaths of what we were looking for. So I did go through that process, issued them a 7-day notice of termination, negotiated an exit, and am moving towards the second highest ranking in the request for qualifications, with the plan of bringing back that scope I have shared. Port City got into designs for future construction, which we were not looking for at this point. And I'm going to share everything but those initial designs with, the next person, and we will negotiate a scope of them that. First time I've had to do that. Want to, let you know that also on the November agenda, I have, executed an agreement for Harold Alfont workforce development dollars to pay for supervisory training for staff and staff that has been identified for succession planning within the organization. Have to jump on it quickly because it winds up at the end of the year, and we have to be substantially into our training to qualify for the 50% reimbursement. So we're looking at a scope of about $8,200 for this training to bring a trainer in. The town will end up paying about $4,100. So I thought that was a pretty good deal. I am finalizing a memorandum of understanding with the fire union for a life safety inspector to work on a special assignment. We could not get a person to fill that hybrid life safety position, so went to the union, and it appears as though they will likely agree to bring that person out as a special assignment while still maintaining their union status. A little bit different, but it's the job done. You are likely going to see application announcements coming out in the near future for our Safer Grant individuals. These are the 3 positions that the town applied for grant funding to fund over the next 3 years. And we've accepted those funds, and those, although the grant was not scheduled to start until February 26th, we have asked for the ability to start our recruitment process earlier because we're having such a hard time recruiting. We wanted to be able to run it twice and not cut into the number of months that we would have grant funding. And the feds are accepting that. You should see a new $675,000 fire truck here any day. Well, not any day. We've got people in New York doing the final inspection before we accept it. So that's happening right now. I will send the stats for police and fire out to you. I will let you know that we have 1 new person starting in the fire department. We're excited about that. We have 3 vacancies in the police department. We have issued 1 conditional offer, so there's still 2 down and 1 in the pipeline. The conditional offer allows us to do a background check and other pre-employment work. I should let you know that we had a CSO. We had 2 CSOs, so that's combined sewer overflows where we ran untreated wastewater into the Penobscot River. During the last 2, we had 1 big event, and then while everything was saturated, we had another mini event. So the big event, I think our peak flow was like 1.65 inches, and the other one was about an inch of rainfall, kind of short periods of time. Also, Chris and I have done everything we're supposed to do, but our discharge permit, if you go online, you're going to see that that's set to expire next month. We have submitted everything to DEP on DEP's time schedule. We're being told that we could wait a year or more before we actually get our permit issued. So we're fine to run on an expired permit, but if anybody goes to look at the plant, they're going to see that we have an expired permit. I want to make sure you know it. Chris is the one right now taking the hit in WPCF. We've had 2 people transfer into public works. So we have a full-time operator position and a shared position right now that Chris is down, and with his small work staff, he's really feeling that. So I'm really happy to report that Rob is working with him, helping him out.
You can make it work.
Yeah. Want to just let you know that construction season is wrapping up. I think Rob is working really hard to try to get as much buttoned up into substantial completion as he can. There may be some neighborhoods that will get letters from him letting them know that we've had to bump them to next construction season for the project. He leaves projects in a point where it's safe through the winter, but it might not be completely done.
Bennett, you done?
Yeah, they're gonna be here a week, so You're gonna see a lot get done this week.
I didn't want to ask because I live there and I didn't want it to seem like partial, but. You're up the road, you're gonna put the pin down.
Hey, I went a long time on Bricked Up Road. Also, just to remind folks that brush pickup has started. And to also remind folks, if they go online and they sign up for the notification process, you get a nifty little text to tell you when your street is gonna have its brush cleaned up, so, or your trash picked up, all sorts of different.
Just to be clear, Sophie, actually that notification goes out to everybody in the town. It's not just, not street by street level,
Oh,
but we
sorry.
do tell everybody.
Okay, well, I was just so thrilled to get mine today. The other, so the last thing that I won't, we have voting tomorrow. Also, we have somebody out on emergency sick leave this week down front, so we are working with one regular staffer down front, so people prepare to have some delay there. So the other two issues, we have a couple of dangerous buildings in town. One of them is at 3 Water Street. It's not to the dangerous point, but code enforcement has been trying to work with people. Unfortunately, it's a situation where people walked away, thought they were going to be foreclosed on, the bank backed out of the foreclosure. And we are now here with a building that needs significant work. The representative for the homeowners who don't wish to be homeowners of this building anymore have reached out to find out whether or not the town is interested in assuming ownership. So if we assumed ownership, we would have to take it down. And based on Rob's estimate, it would be about a $20,000. So just so you know, we might end up with it anyway, and as it sits.
If someone's really anxious to get that property.
3 Water?
Yeah.
Well, they should reach out to the homeowner.
I have, honestly, which I can't, I wouldn't, but.
So the other one we've actually posted as a dangerous building, and that's 39 Margin Street. We went to post it because of conditions that we saw. And the door opened and like the whole kitchen floor is in the basement. So it is really not in good shape.
Is it 39 Market Street?
39. When we talk to code, so we've got a code officer right now who's happy to have things like restored. He's not in the basement, like just push everything in, and he's doesn't even know that there are bones here to fix. So we've found where this person is living, and we're making arrangements to go out and have the code officer talk with this person in assisted living. So I think we might be in a situation where there is no value to sell. There is maybe no funding to be able to deal with it. So
Our back taxes are on.
yeah, we're getting ready to take it for taxes. If at that point, it would almost be cleaner if we could get a release deed in terms of timing and process. So, but that would be a $20,000. Take a house down across from me. So, and then good news on the code enforcement front. I had talked to council about a building that we had posted as unfit for human habitation in the Mount View neighborhood. Went back to take a look, and efforts are clearly being made to improve the sanitary conditions there. We have lifted the notice and will continue to work on that. So unless you want to hear about the 4 skunks I trapped at College Heights this past weekend, I can come in.
No, we don't need to hear about those, but we'll call on you when we need them trapped in our property.
Yeah.
I didn't know you did skunk removal.
So, motion to adjourn, Leo move. Oh,
Yes, indeed.
My staff is not gonna give a peep of public comment yet.
Oh, no,
We do have somebody who has waited through the whole meeting.
Well,
And
let's
she
hear-
raised her hands.
Yeah.
So Catherine Thibodeau. I've allowed her to talk.
Can you hear me?
You can.
Okay, I have waited this entire meeting. I'm not sure why some agenda items had public comment earlier or not, but neither here nor there. I wanted to comment in appreciation for, I guess, Sophie's initiative to look at alternative ways to handle the parking ban. And I really do appreciate that. This issue has come before the council a couple times now this year. And I'm really happy with the movement that has been made. And it seems like an incredibly reasonable plan. I am also feeling the need to comment of how disheartened I am with the comment by, and I don't know all your counselor, the names, but by the counselor's comment that it's just a parking ticket. What is the big deal?
No, ma'am, I was quoting the people who were saying the things that I said were unpleasant. Just to be clear, I was quoting the people, I know that people said some unkind things to you, and I was quoting them and saying I was disappointed that the conversation had become
Okay.
hostile.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that. But it is, you know, I can totally afford a parking ticket. It is not a big deal for me in that it's a ticket. I just think it is clearly, as you have considered and changed, it is the look, how the town looks. To be ticketed at 1:47 a.m. on November 2nd was very upsetting to me. It just did not make me feel like I lived in a community. The 16-year-old boy next door to me got ticketed too. So just for some reference there, also the comment that perhaps I think Sophie, this was your comment that it sounded like you would have rather I had called Orono PD directly to address the issue. And I'm, you know, I guess I feel like that probably would not have solved the problem. So, and that social media is a tough thing. I felt like the conversation was fine on there. I wasn't offended, but I felt, you know, it is a touchy issue when the police are making posts that are funny. I did not see their initial post about making a joke about ticketing people or whatever it was. So I had no context for the second post saying they needed to hold their horses or whatever that one was. So it's just, you know, a point of understanding for folks to please know that parking is a huge issue for us, especially for folks who live in the tough end that have very, very little lots. Some of us have a lot of teenage children who drive, and we're just trying to do the best we can. So it is, you know, and I guess clarifying that comment, you know, is really helpful. So I'm glad I stayed so I could get that clarified. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any other business? Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And all in favor? There you go. See everybody Monday night.
Yes.
Monday afternoon.